When you picture the scales of justice, you almost always imagine this perfectly balanced, blindfolded figure,
Right.
right?
Yeah, it's a very specific, deeply ingrained cultural image.
Exactly. You put the facts of a situation on one side of the scale, you put the consequences on the other, and the scale it tips objectively based on the weight of the truth.
Which is comforting, honestly.
It totally is. It implies this sort of mathematical certainty to fairness. It tells you that this system is logical.
Right. It suggests that human behavior is measured by this cold, unblinking eye that is just, well, it's entirely divorced from who is actually standing on the scale.
That's the whole point of the blindfold.
Exactly. The law isn't supposed to know your name or your background or, most importantly for today's topic, your biology.
Right. But then you step into the modern institutional landscape. And I mean the real lived experience of things like family courts, corporate HR departments, university tribunals.
Yeah, the actual mechanics of society.
Exactly. And suddenly you start to feel like that blindfold is slipping a little.
Oh, definitely.
You realize the scale isn't just weighing the objective facts of what happened. It's weighing the demographic biology of the person presenting those facts.
Which means the math completely breaks down.
It shatters.
It becomes the absolute definition of a rigged ledger, frankly. Because when the identity of the actor matters more than the act itself, well, you no longer have a justice system.
What do you have instead?
You have a caste system managed by bureaucrats.
Wow. Yeah, that is a heavy way to start. Welcome to the Deep Dives, everyone. If you're a new listener, please take a second right now to like and subscribe to the show on whatever platform you're using.
Yes, please do. It really helps us bring you these extensive, uncompromising breakdowns.
It really does. So today we are exploring this explosive, highly controversial, and frankly, absolutely fascinating new ebook.
It really is something else.
It's called I Am Just a Tiny Woman, the Get Out of Responsibility Free Card by Sophie Marie Eve Riker. And let me tell you, it's a completely wild paradigm shift.
It is.
If you are the kind of listener who likes to dig into the primary source material yourself as we go through this, and I highly recommend that you do, you can find the ebook right now on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
You'll definitely want to check it out. It is a text that is actively reshaping conversations.
For sure.
Mainly because it just takes a sledgehammer to some of the most foundational assumptions of modern institutional life.
Completely. Now, just to frame this for you, the listener, we need to talk about who this book is actually speaking to and what it's trying to achieve.
Right, the target audience is key here.
Yeah, so this text is heavily targeted toward men's rights activists and what is broadly referred to as the red-pilled manosphere.
And the mission of today's deep dive is to unpack the author's core thesis from that perspective.
Right, we are looking at her sweeping historical claim of how modern institutions, before they became what they are today, were essentially captured.
Captured by what she describes as feminist and Marxist-aligned safety bureaucracies.
Exactly. She's trying to explain the architecture of a system that a lot of men feel is actively working against them.
But, and this is crucial, before we go a single step further into that architecture, we need to issue a strict, unequivocal neutrality disclaimer.
Yes, absolutely critical. Everyone listening, please hear this. This book contains highly politically charged content.
Very much so.
It touches on gender, law, psychology, and literally the fundamental structure of society.
Yeah.
We are never taking sides here.
Never. We're not endorsing the viewpoints, the politics, or the conclusions of this content.
Right.
Our job today is to impartially act as your guides. We are just here to convey and decode the fascinating ideas and structural arguments contained in the original source material.
I like to think of us as cartographers. We're just mapping out a very controversial territory. We are showing you the roads the author built. We aren't telling you to live there.
Beautifully put. We are just looking at the blueprints.
So, to set the stage for us, what is the central premise of Riker's book? What is she actually arguing at the bedrock level?
At its core, the book claims that modern society operates on a moral ledger that charges men for precision and rewards women for complaint.
Okay, wow. Charges men for precision and rewards women for complaint.
Exactly. Riker uses the concept of the tiny woman, this invocation of biological smallness or perceived fragility, as a systemic get-out-of-responsibility-free card.
Which is where the title comes from.
Right. She argues that women are uniquely granted the sovereignty and privileges of adulthood when it comes to making choices.
But they are allowed to claim the innocence, immunity, and protection of childhood the exact moment consequences arrive.
That is the crux of it, yes.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can analyze these captured institutions like HR or the courts, the author says we have to understand the psychological root cause that makes this entire system possible in the first place.
Yes, the psychological glitch.
Right. She claims you can't build a rigged system unless the people running it have a psychological blind spot. She calls this the foundational glitch.
And to explain this glitch, Riker points to a specific, empirically documented cognitive default.
So she's not just making this up.
No, she doesn't rely on anecdotes here. She grounds this in academic literature. She cites a seminal 1991 psychological study by Alice Eagley and Antonio Mladinic.
Okay, and what did that study show?
It documented something in behavioral psychology called the women are wonderful effect.
I had genuinely never heard of this study before reading the book, but the methodology is fascinating. Can you explain how Eagley and Mladinic actually proved this? Like, what does implicit bias look like in a lab setting?
Yeah, so in the study, researchers asked participants, both male and female, which is important, to associate various traits and adjectives with different categories of people.
Oh.
What they found was a massive, statistically significant in-group bias among women and an out-group bias among men.
Wait, meaning men were biased against other men?
Essentially, yes. Both sexes automatically, subconsciously associated women with positive, moral, and nurturing traits. Words like kind, pure, good. And this association was completely independent of any verifiable ethical performance by the women being judged.
So, it's not that the participants saw a woman do something good and rewarded her for it. It's that their brains basically skipped the evidence phase entirely and just defaulted to she is good.
Precisely. Riker uses this to argue that society has an automatic presumption of female virtue operating well below the threshold of conscious thought.
Just baked right into our brains.
Right. The psychological default setting for a woman in our culture isn't innocent until proven guilty. According to the book, it is saintly until proven otherwise. And even then, she was probably driven to it by trauma.
That is a wild distinction.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, she argues men are basically born serving a probationary sentence of suspicion.
Yes, they don't get that benefit of the doubt.
And she backs this up with a massive statistical claim regarding the justice system, which she calls gamma bias. She points to a highly cited 2015 study by Sanja B. Starr from the University of Michigan.
The numbers in that study are just staggering.
They really are. The study shows that even when controlling for criminal history and the severity of the offense, women receive 63% shorter prison sentences than men for identical crimes.
63%.
It's unbelievable.
What's fascinating here is how Riker connects this raw data back to a broader philosophical argument about the impossibility of systemic equality.
Right.
Think about what a 63% sentencing disparity actually means in practice. She argues that the state doesn't actually punish what you do, it punishes what you are.
Man, that is bleak.
If the application of justice is determined by your demographic identity, your biology, then true equality under the law is mathematically impossible.
Because the math's broken from the start.
Exactly. It ceases to be a system of equality and becomes a biological aristocracy.
It's a total paradigm shift. And to illustrate this gamma bias, Riker uses this amazing visual analogy in the text. I want to spend a minute on this because it really clicked for me.
The lenticular card.
Yes. She compares this systemic bias to a lenticular card. For the listener, you know those ribbed plastic cards you used to get in cereal boxes when you were a kid?
Yeah, the ones that change when you move them.
Exactly. If you tilt them one way, you see one picture, but if you shift your viewing angle just a fraction of an inch, the image completely changes into something else.
It is a brilliant metaphor for her premise.
She says the justice system, and really society at large, is tilted just so. When society is judging a woman, the lenticular card displays a compassionate, understanding face.
The judge, the jury, or the public is actively looking for context.
Yes, they're looking for trauma, looking for external reasons to forgive her actions. But if you flip the angle and put a man in the exact same scenario, committing the exact same act, the card shifts.
And suddenly, society projects a harsh, punitive face.
Right. It attributes the failure entirely to his defective internal character. The context just vanishes.
And Riker is very clear that this extends far beyond the four walls of a courtroom. This lenticular card effect bleeds into what she calls the empathy gap in media and culture.
Yes. Grounding this in everyday life, she talks about missing white woman syndrome. Think about your own media diet or the true crime podcasts you might listen to.
Riker notes that a missing or distressed woman commands global media attention, legislative action, public mourning, massive resource allocation.
Whole search parties are mobilized, national anchors cover it around the clock.
Exactly. But male death, male suffering, or male workplace fatalities are treated as invisible background scenery. It's just ambient noise.
If a middle-aged man goes missing, it barely makes page 6 of the local paper.
Right. The culture, she claims, is conditioned to view male suffering as a routine operating expense for civilization.
Oof. A routine operating expense.
Yeah, whereas female discomfort is treated as a national emergency.
Okay, so if this gamma bias, this psychological glitch where we view men as disposable and women as inherently virtuous, is the baseline, how does it rewrite the actual economic and social rules of modern adulthood?
Well, the author calls this rule set the double move, and this brings us to the core mechanism of the book.
The double move.
Yes. The double move is the operational engine of what Riker terms the gynocentric order. It is the assertion that women demand and receive the autonomy of adulthood at the benefit window, but the immunity of childhood at the responsibility toll.
Autonomy at the benefit window, immunity at the toll. That is such a sharp way to phrase it.
It really cuts to the core of her argument.
But let's ground that in reality. How does that actually play out in real life?
She points to the economic ledger of marriage and divorce as the absolute prime example. Let's look at community property laws.
Okay.
In many jurisdictions, male wealth and labor are split 50-50 upon divorce. The assets a man generated through his labor are viewed by the state as a shared communal resource, regardless of who actually earned the paycheck.
Right. The state basically says you are a partnership. Therefore, the resources belong to both of you equally.
Exactly. But then Riker points out the glaring asymmetry when it comes to the creation of life. Reproductive choices, which carry massive, life-altering, decades-long financial obligations for men in the form of child support, remain unilaterally and exclusively female.
Now, to be fair, Riker actually agrees that a woman should maintain absolute sovereignty over her body. Right? She isn't arguing against bodily autonomy here.
No, not at all. But she points out the brutal hypocrisy of the institutional ledger.
Oh, so?
The man loses sovereignty over his earnings the moment she chooses to exit the arrangement, or chooses to carry a child he didn't want, but he has zero say in the initial choice that bound his labor in the first place.
Right.
The choice is completely severed from financial consequence for her, but the consequence is imposed with the threat of state violence, meaning prison for him.
The double move.
Mm-hmm.
She gets the autonomy of choice, he gets the responsibility of the toll.
Ex-
And then Riker scales this concept up to the macroeconomic level. She looks at the modern corporate landscape, specifically focusing on what she calls the workplace parity paradox.
This is a very grounding argument.
It really is. And I have to admit, this part made me stop and think about the physical reality of our infrastructure. Riker highlights that activists are constantly demanding 50-50 equity in safe, climate-controlled corporate boardrooms.
Right, they want equal representation in the C-suite, in tech, in media.
But she notes that these same activists never demand equal representation in the sewers, on the deep-sea oil rigs, in the logging camps, or in the coal mines.
And she cites the Bureau of Labor Statistics here, showing that men account for a staggering 92% of occupational deaths.
92%.
It's massive.
When a bridge is built or a power line is repaired in a storm or sewage is processed, it is almost exclusively men dying to keep the lights on and the water clean. But society renders those dirty, dangerous jobs invisible.
Riker points out that the demand is exclusively for equality of reward without equality of risk.
She writes that the penthouse is aggressively claimed in the name of fairness, but the sewers are quietly left to others.
It's a really powerful image.
But wait, how does the author explain this shifting definition of the word equity? Because obviously, demanding 50-50 in the boardroom, but completely ignoring the 92% death rate on the oil rig, requires a very specific, almost acrobatic, linguistic justification.
It does.
How do modern institutions justify this blind spot?
Well, Riker claims that the very concept of equity was historically sabotaged and redefined to make this hypocrisy possible. She actually takes the reader back to Aristotle.
Oh, wow. Aristotle.
Yeah. If you look at Aristotle's original framework, equity meant adjusting the rigid letter of the law to achieve true contextual justice for an individual.
Okay, so making it fit the specific situation.
Exactly. It meant recognizing that a blanket rule might be unfair in a specific nuanced situation. It was a noble, individualized concept of fairness.
It was about making the law more human.
Very much so. But Riker argues that today, over the last few decades, the safety bureaucracies have morphed equity into a bureaucratic weapon.
A weapon.
Yes. It has been redefined to mean forced demographic parity of outcome, regardless of input, risk, or merit.
Ah, I see.
And this new definition inherently punishes male competence. Because if competence, or a willingness to take extreme physical risks, correlates with demographic characteristics in a specific field.
Like logging or deep-sea fishing.
Right. The bureaucracy views that disparity as a problem to be eradicated rather than excellence or sacrifice to be rewarded.
Here's where it gets really interesting. If the double move is the rule for society at large, how does this actually function on a Tuesday morning in a corporate office?
Right. Where does the rubber meet the road?
Exactly. Where is the friction point for the average guy working a white-collar job? Riker moves into this brutal takedown of corporate HR departments. She describes them not as human resources, but as the bureaucracy of comfort.
This is where she introduces the interpersonal dynamic she calls the damsel in the boardroom.
The damsel in the boardroom.
Yes. Riker argues that in the modern corporate environment, female emotional distress has been weaponized into a literal jurisdiction. It has become the supreme law of the office.
The way she explains this is chilling. She says that linguistic alchemy has been used by activist HR bureaucrats to completely redefine words we thought we all understood.
Language is definitely the battlefield here.
Take the word safety. Historically, safety meant the absence of physical danger. You wear a hard hat so a brick doesn't crack your skull.
Right.
But HR has redefined safety to mean the absence of psychological discomfort.
And violence underwent a similar dangerous mutation.
Violence.
Yeah. Violence used to mean physical force inflicting bodily injury. Now, under these captured corporate definitions, violence can include a firm email, an assertive tone of voice, or even a simple factual correction in a meeting that makes a female colleague feel unsettled or challenged.
Well, let's play this out for a second, just make it concrete. A man and a woman are at a marketing meeting. She presents a slide with incorrect financial projections. He says, actually, those numbers are wrong. We need to adjust the Q3 forecast.
Right, a normal business interaction.
Exactly. But as she reports to HR that his tone made her feel unsafe, Riker argues that the factual accuracy of his correction becomes completely irrelevant.
To the HR bureaucracy, her feeling is the fact. Her discomfort is treated as an objective hazard that must be mitigated.
Which leads directly into Riker's exploration of corporate Kafka traps.
Yes, Kafka traps.
For the listener who might be unfamiliar with the term, a Kafka trap, named after the author Franz Kafka and his novel The Trial, is a scenario where the process itself becomes the punishment.
It's a nightmare scenario.
In a Kafka trap, the very act of denying a charge is viewed by the authority as proof of your guilt.
It's like arguing with a funhouse mirror. You say, I wasn't aggressive, I was just stating a fact, and HR says, your defensiveness right now is proof of your underlying aggression.
Right. Riker points out that corporate HR doesn't act like a judge seeking objective truth. I like to think of it like an insurance adjuster minimizing risk.
That's a great way to put it.
The corporation views the male employee as a deductible. Riker talks about the use of shadow files and anonymous complaints where a man's career is dismantled in a windowless room and his rational, evidence-based defense is logged in his file as hostility toward the investigative process.
Riker states flatly, the corporate institution does not protect the vulnerable, it protects the fragile narrative by dismantling the strong.
Wow.
The corporation believes it can cannibalize male merit to feed the grievance machine indefinitely, simply because men will quietly endure it to keep a paycheck.
So, given this bleak, almost dystopian picture of corporate HR, what does she suggest? She actually offers tactical advice here, which surprised me. What is a man supposed to do when he gets called into that windowless room?
She does offer a very specific playbook. Riker's advice to the listener facing a shadow file or a thought crime tribunal is uncompromising. Never accept the quiet settlement.
By quiet settlement, you mean the NDA and the severance check. They slide a few months' pay across the table in exchange for your signature and your silence.
Exactly. She argues that the quiet settlement is a trap where a man trades his professional reputation for the institution's continued convenience. Instead, Riker advises men to invoke specific employment law tools. She says to file for constructive discharge.
For listeners who haven't dealt with employment law, let's define that. Constructive discharge basically means proving that the employer made the work environment so hostile, so legally toxic, that you were essentially forced to quit.
Right. It treats your resignation as a termination.
Yes. She tells men to use that legal mechanism to demand HR records and legal discovery, and to force human resources managers to explain their secret dossiers under oath in a deposition.
Her strategy is to drag the bureaucracy out of the shadows and into the blinding sunlight of a real courtroom.
Where objective evidence, cross-examination, and the rules of civil procedure still matter.
Exactly.
Okay, but this raises a huge question. If corporate HR departments are enforcing this bizarre bureaucracy of comfort, where are they learning to do this?
Right, because this mindset didn't just appear out of nowhere.
Where are these HR reps being trained to view due process as an obstacle?
That's exactly the question Riker asks, and it points her straight to the modern university campus. She argues that the corporate environment is entirely downstream of academia.
The people running HR today were socialized in the university tribunals of the last 15 years.
Which brings us to the capture of educational institutions.
How did universities create this massive risk management machinery that strips accused men of their rights? Riker points to a very specific and highly controversial historical catalyst.
The 2011 Department of Education Dear Colleague letter.
Yes, this is a critical piece of the puzzle. For context, Title IX is a 1972 civil rights law that was originally designed to ensure equal funding for men's and women's sports and prevent sex-based discrimination in education.
But Riker argues that the 2011 Dear Colleague letter fundamentally mutated Title IX. She frames this document not as administrative advice from the Obama-era Department of Education, but as a literal financial extortion scheme.
Walk us through the mechanics of that. How does a letter become extortion?
She claims the federal government held a crushing threat over every university in the country. Aggressively pursue and adjudicate sexual misconduct charges under this new, expansive Title IX framework, or face federal investigation and the total loss of federal student funding.
And if a university loses its federal funding, it ceases to exist. It goes bankrupt overnight.
Exactly. This, according to the book, instantly generated a market for male scapegoats. Universities had to prove to the federal government that they were taking it seriously, and the only way to prove that was to produce a high volume of guilty verdicts.
And to make this quota system work, to generate those guilty verdicts, they had to degrade the evidentiary standards. This is where it gets terrifying for any parent of a college-aged son.
It really is.
Riker details the shift to the preponderance of the evidence standard. What does that actually mean in a campus tribunal?
Well, in a criminal court, you have to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. That's a very high bar, maybe 95 or 99% certainty. But the 2011 letter mandated that schools use the preponderance of the evidence standard for these life-altering accusations. That translates to a mere 51% likelihood of guilt.
51%. It's basically a coin flip weighted by a feather.
It really is.
Riker points out that 51% is the legal threshold you would use in small claims court for a minor contract dispute over an unpaid landscaping invoice.
Right.
And now it's being used to completely destroy a young man's academic career, get him expelled, and brand him a monster for life on his transcript.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this degraded standard is the architecture of the tyranny of believe women.
Wow.
Riker views that phrase as the literal definition of dismantled due process. To accept the cultural premise that an accusation is functionally equivalent to evidence is, in her words, to endorse tyranny.
She actually compares it to the Salem witch trials, just with administrative letterheads.
Yes, and she backs this up with massive cultural touchstones to show how eager society is to accept this tyranny. She cites the 2006 Duke lacrosse case and the 2014 UVA Rolling Stone hoax.
Let's look at those. Both were instances where the national media, the academic establishment, and even law enforcement eagerly believed horrific, sensational accusations without a shred of corroborating evidence.
They publicly destroyed innocent young men to feed a pre-existing narrative about toxic campus culture.
It proves, in Riker's view, the catastrophic failure of abandoning due process. When you replace the presumption of innocence with institutionalized misandry, cases like Duke and UVA aren't aberrations. They are the intended result of the system functioning as designed.
Exactly.
I have to push back logically here, though. I wrestled with this while reading her analysis of the university system.
Okay, what stood out?
She talks about administrative arithmetic, but these are educators. You're telling me a college dean or a university president looks at a 19-year-old male student and just sees a liability spreadsheet? That's a massive, deeply cynical claim.
It is cynical, but Riker insists it is the only rational explanation for their behavior.
Why would university administrators willingly sacrifice their own tuition-paying students to a kangaroo court?
You have to look at it from the perspective of a risk management bureaucrat whose entire career depends on institutional survival. To a dean, defending an accused man thoroughly, insisting on due process, invites severe federal civil rights probes, aggressive protests from campus activists, catastrophic media attacks, and the potential loss of hundreds of millions in funding.
So it's cowardice masked as morality.
Precisely. The math is simple to the bureaucrat. One 19-year-old man's future holds infinitely less value than institutional reputation multiplied by federal funding.
All right.
The accused male is simply the sacrificial input required to generate the compliance documentation that keeps the university's doors open.
It's chilling arithmetic. So if this is how the institutions operate, how does this gynocentric system defend itself against rational debate?
That is a great question.
Like if a man points out these statistical gaps or points out the 51% evidentiary standard, how is he silenced? Riker argues it's done through rhetorical warfare and preemptively controlling the very language we use.
The book argues that the system survives by preventing the construction of a logical counter-argument. If you control the vocabulary, you control the boundaries of thought.
Right.
Riker uses an incredible real-world example from a 2015 essay written by a student at Claremont McKenna College.
Ah, the essay that gives the book its title.
Yes. This student wrote an open letter to the dean demanding that the institution ban intellectual disagreement and challenging conservative viewpoints from her presence.
And she literally invoked her physical smallness, stating, "I am just a tiny woman," as a rhetorical shield.
She explicitly equated a challenging intellectual lecture with a physical assault, demanding a get-out-of-responsibility-free card for managing her own emotional reactions to ideas she didn't like.
Riker calls this the blueprint of modern rhetorical warfare. Mercy for the weak inevitably translates to punishment for the strong. By weaponizing her perceived fragility, she gains immense administrative power to silence her ideological opponents.
And when that emotional shield is penetrated, if someone actually manages to corner an activist with data or logic, Riker says they deploy a systematic intellectual shell game known as the Mott and Bailey fallacy.
Okay, let's unpack this fallacy for the listener, because Riker's use of it is brilliant, and once you see it, you will notice it everywhere in political discourse. First, what is a Mott and Bailey?
It's named after a medieval style of castle.
Okay.
The Bailey is a vast, expansive, highly desirable courtyard where all the economic activity happens, but it's very hard to defend from attackers. The Mott is a small, heavily fortified tower on a hill. It's miserable to live in, but impossible to breach.
Got it.
The Mott and Bailey fallacy operates on this architecture. Activists claim a vast, expansive, and highly controversial territory, the ideological Bailey.
Let's use Riker's example. The Bailey is the claim that a raw statistical wage gap is absolute proof of a massive, intentional, misogynistic conspiracy that requires corporate quotas and massive bureaucratic intervention to fix.
Right.
It's a huge, unfounded claim that ignores variables like hours worked, overtime, dangerous conditions, and career choices.
Exactly. But the moment you attack that Bailey, the moment you challenge that claim with economic data showing that women actually make different choices that affect their earnings, they instantly retreat to the Mott.
The easily defensible fortress.
Right. They say, wow, why are you so angry? We just want equal pay for equal work.
Which everyone agrees with.
Yeah.
It's already federal law under the Equal Pay Act of 1963. Nobody is arguing against equal pay for equal work. So you look like a monster for attacking the Mott, while they get to keep extracting cultural and financial resources based on the conspiracy theory of the Bailey.
It is, as Riker describes it, a coward's gambit. It is designed to extract concessions through emotional blackmail and linguistic manipulation rather than logical justification.
And driving all of this rhetorical warfare, Riker introduces a psychological theory she calls the father complex. I found this to be one of the most provocative, but also maybe the most speculative parts of the book.
It is definitely her most psychoanalytical claim. Riker theorizes that a significant portion of modern feminist activism is driven by women projecting unresolvable anger at absent, weak, or disappointing biological fathers onto a phantom societal entity called the patriarchy.
She writes that this patriarchy is the perfect scapegoat because it is unfalsifiable, inexhaustible, and always guilty.
You can't put the patriarchy on trial, so you can never lose the case against it.
But the double move appears here too, because while they project adolescent fury at this phantom patriarchy, demanding it be dismantled, they simultaneously treat the state and corporate institutions as surrogate fathers.
Yes.
They expect these entities to provide endless validation, psychological safety, and unconditional financial subsidies.
The state becomes the ultimate bureaucratic husband. It drains resources from men via taxes to subsidize female life choices while demanding nothing from women in return beyond their political loyalty and their ballots at the voting booth.
I mean, I see her logic, but I do wonder if reducing a massive sociological movement to daddy issues is oversimplifying things.
It's certainly a bold claim.
But regardless of whether you buy the psychological origin, the tactical result is undeniable. To survive this rhetorical warfare, Riker provides something she calls the Logos translation table. Logos being the Aristotelian appeal to logic and reason.
A very useful tool for the reader.
Can you walk the listener through how Riker decodes feminist jargon back into plain English?
Gladly. Riker argues that in any debate, you must define the terms before they are stolen and inverted. Let's look at her translation table. When activists say they need a safe space, Riker translates that too. A censorship zone where facts are deemed illegal and emotional fragility is the supreme law.
Wow, that is a heavy redefinition. What else?
When they use the term toxic masculinity, she translates it to male self-sacrifice, physical courage, stoicism, and emotional restraint. The very virtues that built civilization, which the culture now wishes to exploit, but no longer wishes to honor or reciprocate.
That is just brutal. And what about the word patriarchy itself?
Riker points out the pure etymology of patriarchy. It is historically a neutral architectural term for the male head of a household who bears the existential, physical burden of governance, provision, and survival.
But she says it has been entirely emptied of that original meaning to become a demonic, catch-all entity blamed for all female shortcomings.
The logic is completely circular. If a woman succeeds, she beat the patriarchy. If she fails, the patriarchy crushed her.
It's an unfalsifiable ghost. It's a conspiracy theory that requires no evidence. So if this is the rhetorical game we are all forced to play, what is the ultimate literal cost of this system?
It's a steep cost.
We've talked about economics and institutions, but Riker argues that this male tax is paid in blood. It is paid in health, sanity, and human lives.
She starts her analysis of this ultimate cost at the very beginning of a male's life, the education system.
Right.
She bluntly refers to the modern public school classroom as the Skinner box, named after the behaviorist B.F. Skinner.
Because it's all about behavioral conditioning.
Exactly. Riker claims that modern schools have abandoned physical rigor and discipline to become therapeutic environments optimized exclusively for female sociality, stillness, and compliance.
She says boy energy is treated as a medical diagnosis, right? Think about how many young boys are diagnosed with ADHD simply because they can't sit perfectly still in a chair for 8 hours a day.
Yes. The system measures boys against a female-coded standard of collaboration and verbal processing, and declares their native physical architecture defective.
Rather than questioning the design of the institution,
Yeah.
rather than asking, should we let these boys run outside and burn off energy, they pathologize male vitality.
They legally sacrifice and chemically sedate boys with amphetamines into submission so that the classroom remains a quiet, comfortable space for the teachers.
And this institutional blindness to male biology scales all the way up from the elementary school classroom to the absolute peaks of the healthcare empathy gap.
It's a straight line.
Riker provides a devastating statistic here that completely floored me. Let's talk about cancer funding. Prostate cancer claims roughly 30,000 American lives annually.
Yes.
That is a dead heat, a statistical tie with breast cancer deaths.
Yet examine the cultural flow of resources and empathy. For every dollar directed at breast cancer research, prostate cancer receives a tiny fraction.
With wild.
Riker argues this proves a deeply uncomfortable truth. Society views a woman's chest as a sacred cultural object worth mobilizing entire retail seasons around. Think of the pink ribbons on everything from NFL cleats to soup cans, while a man's prostate is viewed as an expendable, slightly embarrassing piece of plumbing.
The male body is treated like a durable good. It is used until it breaks, and then it is discarded without ceremony or telethon.
Exactly.
And she links this sense of profound disposability directly to the suicide epidemic.
It is an epidemic that is almost entirely ignored. Male suicide rates are up to 4 times higher than female rates.
4 times.
Riker explicitly ties this to economic disposability. Men are taught from birth that their identity, their worth, and their access to love is entirely contingent on their capacity to produce wealth and utility for others.
A man who loses his job often loses his marriage, access to his children, and his will to live. But the culture just shrugs. It's written off as a personal failure, not a systemic crisis.
Meanwhile, the state actively covers its eyes to male suffering. Riker dissects something called the Duluth model, and I want to spend a lot of time on this because it blew my mind.
Oh man, the Duluth model. Yes, let's get into it. If you want to know how the state actually operates on a Tuesday night when a 911 call is made, you have to understand the Duluth model.
Developed in 1981 by feminist activists in Duluth, Minnesota, the Duluth model dominates law enforcement training regarding domestic violence globally.
Globally, like all over.
Yes, it is the standard. And it operates on the explicit, hard-coded assumption that all domestic violence is a unilateral expression of patriarchal power and control exercised by men against women.
Meaning, the police are literally trained to look at a chaotic domestic dispute through a purely ideological, gendered lens.
That's right.
So what happens when a squad car pulls up to a house?
Under the Duluth model framework, the male is preemptively categorized as the batterer, and the female is the victim, regardless of who has the scratches or who made the call.
Even if he called the police?
Even if he made the call. Riker points out that empirical data, including studies from the CDC, shows that women initiate reciprocal intimate partner violence at equal or even slightly higher rates than men.
Wow.
But the Duluth model completely blinds the state to female-perpetrated or reciprocal violence. It routes men into the criminal justice system simply for being male and present when the police arrive. The physical evidence takes a back seat to the ideological framework.
So what does this all mean? If you're a man listening to this, and you accept Riker's premise that we have this massive structural tax, this completely rigged gamma matrix that extracts your labor while denying your humanity.
Yeah.
What does Riker propose men actually do in the face of this? Because it sounds incredibly bleak.
It sounds bleak, but she doesn't advocate for despair. She outlines a philosophical and practical concept she calls praxa, which stems from praxis, meaning action and restoration.
Okay, action steps.
And she is very clear on one rule. Do not ask for pity and do not rage against the machinery, simply stop feeding it.
She calls for fiscal resistance. Refusing the lie that your endless grinding productivity is owed to a system that treats you as a hazard to be managed.
She advises withdrawing emotional capital. Stop engaging in the Mott and Bailey debates. Refuse the automatic apology when you've done nothing objectively wrong.
Do not apologize to the HR tribunal to save your job if it costs you your dignity.
Exactly. She also specifically targets the next generation, calling for men to pull their sons out of captured public schools, the Skinner boxes we discussed earlier, in favor of classical academies, trade apprenticeships, or homeschooling networks that honor logic, debate, and physical rigor.
Stop negotiating with a tribunal that trades your liberty for its liability. If the game is rigged, take your chips and leave the table.
Precisely. Build parallel structures. Let the captured system pay for its own contradictions without your subsidy.
Which brings us to the outro of the book. Riker leaves the reader with what she calls the ultimate tool for navigating this landscape, the sex swap diagnostic.
It's a mental scalpel designed to cut through the cultural sentiment and reveal the underlying gamma bias.
And she recounts this chilling real-world example of two Texas teachers from 2013 to prove it.
It is the ultimate, undeniable distillation of everything we've talked about today. Same year, same state, same criminal statute. In the first case, a female teacher carries on a prolonged, illegal sexual relationship with a 13-year-old male student. When she is caught, the system's lenticular card shifts to compassion. She receives 10 years of probation.
10 years probation.
The defense, the media, and the judge frame it as a tragic mistake by an otherwise good person.
But then, you look at the second case. A male teacher commits the exact identical act under the exact same law with the 13-year-old female student.
The lenticular card flips to the punitive face. He receives 40 years in state prison.
Well, 40 years.
The judge and the newspapers uniformly call him a predatory monster. It is the exact same act. But because it is a different sex, society deploys a wildly different moral vocabulary, a different standard of empathy, and a radically different punishment.
Riker's rule for the listener is simple, and you can apply it to any news story you read today. Swap the sexes, but keep the facts identical. If the moral verdict flips, the system is rigged. It's not justice. It's a biological protection racket wearing a powdered wig.
And this raises an incredibly important question, which is the final provocative thought Riker leaves lingering at the very end of the text.
It's just what?
If this entire gynocentric order, this massive captured bureaucracy of HR departments, family courts, and universities truly relies completely on male labor, male tax revenue, and male complicity to survive, what happens to the very fabric of civilization the day a critical mass of men simply step back and say, Let them steer the ship into the ice.
Wow, it's almost an Atlas Shrugged scenario. A civilization running on a single axis of moral optics, kept afloat only by the quiet subscription and physical labor of the men it actively despises and punishes.
Right. What happens when the sewer workers, the oil riggers, and the corporate scapegoats simply walk away from the altar of utility?
It is a profound structural challenge to the modern social contract. It asks us to consider what happens when the people paying the toll refuse to cross the bridge.
It really is, and it's a question that is going to echo for a long time.
Once again, we want to remind you, the listener, of our absolute neutrality on this highly charged book. We are mapping the controversial territory Riker has drawn, not telling you to live there. We are just decoding the architecture.
But if you want to understand the structure of these arguments for yourself, and you really should read it to grasp the full context, go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now to buy I Am Just a Tiny Woman.
It is a masterclass in rhetorical deconstruction, regardless of what your political priors might be. It forces you to think critically about the water we are all swimming in.
Absolutely. You can also follow the author on Substack at Conrad Riker for more of their ongoing analysis on these topics.
And please, if you found this deep dive valuable, remember to like and subscribe to the show on your podcast app so we can keep bringing you these massive, unflinching breakdowns.
Until next time, keep your eyes open, question the consensus, and always check the scales.
Because sometimes that blindfolded figure of justice isn't blind at all. Sometimes she's just peeking out from behind a lenticular card. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.